Next, 2.2. GST. GST is a tax on a sales or a purchase. Similar to VAT in Vietnam. VAT in Vietnam called value added tax. It's also 10% on top of the sales or purchase. Similarly, in Australia, we have GST, which stands for goods and service tax. So every time that you, as a business, you are purchasing or selling a good or service, you have to pay this tax. And that tax is also 10%. Okay? So imagine you are selling a, $3,000 laptop. Okay? You're selling a $3,000 laptop. So the sale itself, the sales, which is the selling price of the item, in this case, $3,000 laptop. So we are expecting to receive this much from the customer. Yes or no? No, right? Because when the customer buys something from us, they also have to pay the tax including in that as well. Not really including, but they also have to pay the tax on top of this. So what is the tax that we just learned? What's the name of the account for tax? We call it GST clearing. Okay? Remember that. The name for the tax account is called GST clearing, not just GST. A lot of students make this mistake when they are recording transactions. Okay? Sales 3,000 and GST clearing 300 because it's 10% of the 3,000. So the total cash that we are expecting from customers is 3,300. I hope this makes sense so far. The sales itself is 3,000. The tax on top of that is GST clearing 300, and the total cash expected to receive from customer is 3,300. We call this number blue. This number is excluding GST. Excluding means doesn't include. All right. So this 3,000 here doesn't include any GST or any tax yet. And this figure here, we call it including GST. Because within this number, there's already $300 of GST included in it, right? Other than excluding, sometimes we call it GST exclusive. Same thing in the same manner, GST inclusive. Right? Either including GST or GST inclusive. Either excluding GST or GST exclusive. So it's super important to understand which figure or any of this figure is including or excluding GST. Because sometimes in the question, we don't just say, oh, the sale itself is 3,000 and GST clearing is 300. We actually give you a little bit more complicated question about that so that we can test your understanding. So say, what I can say is, right? So instead of saying we are selling a laptop of $3,000 plus $300 of GST on top, we don't give it that easy to you. So we might phrase the question as the sales is $3,300, GST inclusive. Right? So when you see this number and it says GST inclusive, you have to figure out how much of this is GST clearing and how much of this is the sales itself. Alright? If it's excluding, that's easy. If it's excluding, you just simply time it with 10% to figure out the GST and then add the two together to get the including GST figure. However, a lot of students make mistakes in figuring out this one. The most common mistake is the moment that they see sales $3,300, they immediately assume that this one is without GST. They didn't even read the later part. So the later part in this question is GST inclusive, meaning this figure already has GST on it, inside of it, right? So how do you figure it out without looking at these numbers? How do you figure it out how much is GST in this one, how much is GST, and how much is the sales? Very simple. You take this GST inclusive figure, so GST inclusive figure divided by 11 equals GST clearing. Okay? So 3,300 divided by 11, immediately you can easily figure it out. Divided by 11 is 300. And therefore, the rest of it, 3,300 minus 300, 3,000 is the sales. So, like I said before, the trickiest part in this particular chapter, it's not about memorizing or how much tax is that. We always know it's always 10%. The trickiest thing is whether you read the question carefully enough to know whatever figure you're reading, is it GST inclusive or GST exclusive? Now, I'm going to use the same example and show you the difference between the two if you make a mistake. Okay? Alright, so if you read this one without reading this part, you would assume that this one, the entire sales is 3,300. Right? You would assume that because you didn't read this part. So if the sales itself is 3,300, then the sales would be 3,300. And because this one, you assume that it hasn't included the GST, you have to add the GST on top of that. So the GST on top of 3,300 would be 330. And therefore, the total expected cash coming from the customer is not like this. It's 3,630. Right? So, as you can see, if you're misreading the question, if you're misreading the information, the customer would have to pay either 3,300 or 3,630. They are totally different numbers. Okay? So be very careful when you're reading the question. Either it's a sales or it's a purchase. You have to be mindful of the GST inclusive or exclusive.